Hey everyone, I'm Ryan the Nature Gamer. Welcome back to my channel. This is another video we're reading aloud today, Budding Prospects by T.C. Boyle. And we are on chapter 3. So we're just reading one chapter at a time. I'm getting over a little cough, so if I cough during the video, I apologize. It should be gone soon. So this is chapter 3 of Budding Prospects. She stood at the door looking through us, incongruous in an apron that featured a pair of chipmunks brandishing oversized carving knives and the slogan, "Why don't you come up and see us sometime?" Woodwork leaned behind her, dried flowers threw shadows like teeth against the wall. I smiled, no response. We'd heard the music from the road the instant we stepped out of the car. Now in the open doorway was an assault loud enough to ionize gases, impair hearing, score the lining of the brain. There was an aggressive smell of cookery, too, garlic sizzling in olive oil, that constricted my throat and poked like a finger at my gut. It was drizzling. Cold. Aorta looked down at her feet, then up at my face and away again. "Hello," she said. Phil and Gesh shuffled behind me like a pair of thugs. Somehow, somewhere, Phil had dug up a khaki overcoat identical to Gesh's, double-breasted, pleated, belted and encrusted with stainless steel loops and couplings that flashed like badges, and they were both wearing fishing hats with the brims pulled low. Aorta stepped back. Gesh paused to grind out his cigarette in the upturned palm of a headless mannequin outside the door, and then we were in. The door closed with a heavy, airtight thump, like the door of a bank vault. We found ourselves in a narrow hallway crowded with hunting trophies. Teeth, horns, nostrils, more dead flowers, dumb, staring eyes. Javelinas drew back their lips to expose tusks the color of tobacco. Mule deer thrust out their antlers. A wizened black creature I didn't recognize seemed to be devouring itself in a frozen tumult of tooth and claw. "Well," I said pointlessly. The music raged, the smell of food toward our stomachs. I shouted out introductions. My companions stuck their heads distractedly. Aorta stifled a smile. Was she naturally fractious or merely shy? And then turned to lead us down a series of hallways and a flight of stairs to the lower level of a lodge that she shared with Vogelsang. She left us in what had once been the ballroom, big floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of treetops and ocean, and disappeared through a swinging door at the far end of the room. I caught a glimpse of Vogelsang in chef's hat and apron, standing over a stove as the door swung back on itself. Phil dropped into the sofa as if he'd been shot, and Gesh strode directly to the amplifier and cut the volume. The silence was thunderous. 1 minute a desperate, ragged voice had been raging in my ears over the amplified thump of tribal drums, and in the next I could detect the smallest sounds. A spoon rotated in a pot, the hiss of a gas burner. As if in compensation, the cooking smell seemed to intensify, tempering the atmosphere like a mother's touch. The room is huge, vaulted like a cathedral, and literally encrusted with the objects of Vogelsang's collecting mania, as cluttered and baroque as a hall in the Museum of Natural History. Which is not to say that each article didn't have its precise place or that a single piece was displayed to disadvantage. The Tahitian gill nets were suspended from the ceiling, softening the effect of the open beams. A gleaming espresso machine climbed the wall like an instrument of torture. Knives and guns were arranged symmetrically on hooks over the fireplace. The Euro paintings, richly flamed and fastidiously hung, occupied a nook over a party of mannequins, and stuffed badgers in coats and t-shirts grouped round a table in the corner. There was a long dining table in one section of the room, a TV and stereo cubicle in another, a museum display case containing pottery shards and fossilized human bone just to the left of the kitchen door. You could spend a week poking through it all and still have another 8 rooms to tour. "Hey," Gesh was saying, "did you see this?" Phil got up to join him, wistful in appreciation. I laughed. He was standing over one of Vogelsang's taxidermic triumphs, a pair of bobcats doing the Lindy, claws entwined, knees bent, heads thrown back in Dionysian ecstasy. Beside them, a cake-walking salmon leaped into a lampshade, the soft white bulb protruding from its mouth like an egg in a comedy routine. Gesh was trying his index finger against the incisor of one of the bobcats when the kitchen door heaved open, and Vogelsang burst into the room, grinning wide. "Welcome, welcome," he said, pumping my hand, clapping Phil on the back, and hesitating ever so slightly before reaching for Gesh's hand. Vogelsang had discarded the white hat and apron and was wearing a t-shirt that announced, "I'm okay. You're okay." There was a moment of confusion over the handshake, Vogelsang coming straight on for the businessman's hand clasp, Gesh cocking his wrist for the soul shake, and then Vogelsang was asking us what we'd like. Cocktail, beer, pot, sherry, mulled cider, a nice dried, not-too-tart Zinfandel. He'd come across it at a little vineyard in Sonoma County. Gesh asked him what kind of beer he had, and Vogelsang listed 6 or 7 imported brands. Yeah, that sounds good, Gesh said, sinking into the sofa and raising a work boot to the coffee table. Beer. Vogelsang was a little edgy. I could tell by his diction, which got ever more precise, sprinkled with the I shalls and pardon me's, as if he were trying out for the role of Prince Charles in a made-for-TV movie of the future monarch's love life. He was out of the room and back in an instant with our drinks. Phil and I had asked for scotch and a tray of antipasto. We're having Italian tonight, he said. I hope you fellows don't mind. I make my own pasta, and I've been simmering the sauce since I turned it out this morning. I couldn't help grinning. He was amazing. Entrepreneur, culturado, expert mechanic, carpenter, electrician, collector nonpareil, and gourmet chef to boot. We murmured our assent. The congenial guest. Sounds great, Phil said. There was a silence. Vogelsang was twisting a wine glass in his hands. Perched on the arm of the sofa, he looked like a bird of prey, his nose hooked like an accipiter's, the blonde hair cropped close as feathers. Phil and Gus were sunk into the couch like cephalopods washed up on the beach. Vogelsang's tone was different now, terser, more businesslike. So you fellows know all the details, correct? He looked at me. I nodded. Gus stirred and pushed himself up with a grunt, as if it required a Herculean effort. Took a long swallow of beer, and then looked at Vogelsang in the eye. No, he said, something obstinate and combative creeping into his voice. Why don't you tell us about it? For the past week and a half, Phil had been occupying the spare bedroom at Fair Oaks, and Gesh had been sleeping on the couch in the living room. It had taken them a single day to wrap up their affairs in Tahoe. Phil phoned the Tahoe teriyaki, shouted, I quit, and at the bewildered busboy who picked up the phone and then hung up. Having forgotten to identify himself, Gesh simply failed to show up for his bartending job. The Cadillac was chalked up as a loss. The girl on the couch, her name was Nelda, was given responsibility for the chalet/cabin/condo/duplex. The landlord was berated and abused via telephone, and close friends were lied to. The official story was that Phil and Gesh were moving to San Francisco to work with me in the remodeling trade. It was rumored that Crazy Eddie's mother was wiring bail money, so Phil felt he could rest easy on the score, and he closed out his bank account with a check of $32.14. Well, he said with a grin after he hung up on the landlord, the only thing now is to pack up all of this shit, gesturing at the mounds of arcane artifacts that littered the floor like leavings of an aboriginal tribe, and hit the road. We strapped Phil's skis to the top of the Toyota, along with 3 or 4 cardboard boxes of key belongings and priceless mementos, like the lacquered conch shell he'd brought back from Miami Beach and the history reports he'd been saving since 9th grade. He lashed his mattress to the boxes, which were in turn lashed to the skis, which were fixed to the Toyota's roof by means of a frayed bit of clothesline snaked through the windows, and Granny nodded at the level of the driver's forehead. His record collection, acetylene torch, and guitar took up the entire back seat. Gesh was easier. His worldly possessions amounted to 2 Safeway bags stuffed with odd bits of clothing, chiefly dirty underwear, judging from the top layer, and a box of paperback books. When we had it all together, it was nearly dark. The mattress, it was a new king-size Sleepy's deluxe special model, and Phil couldn't bring himself to part with it, sagged over the rear window and mushroomed out from the top of the car like a pulpy carapace. I asked Phil if he was sure if the rope would hold. This, he said, cinching a limp strand of clothesline to the radio antenna. Are you kidding? You could take this thing through a hurricane and then drive coast to coast and back again. He patted the mattress. No, this baby isn't going anywhere. As we were crossing the Bay Bridge 4.5 hours later, a sudden gust lifted the mattress off the roof and deposited it beneath the wheels of a semi loaded with ball bearings. When it broke loose, it took a box of mementos with it, slamming at the roof of the car like an angry fist and then tearing back with a heart-seizing rumble and a rush of wind. What was that? Phil gasped, jerking awake. I don't know, I said, trying to account for the sudden visibility through the rear window. I think we lost something. Gesh's voice was flat and emotionless. He could have been a radio commentator noting a minuscule change in hog futures. Your mattress, he said. We stopped in the inside lane. Trucks shrieked by with a suck of wind. Tires hissed like death. The hair beat crazily at our heads. I could barely catch my breath, each truck tearing the oxygen from my lungs like an explosion. The mattress had already been flattened along 3/4 of its length. The Phil made several feints to rush out and nab it, but the traffic was mindless. 60 miles an hour. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The bridge swayed with the thunder of the big semis. There was a stink of diesel fuel, gull shit, the dead man's tide. We shrugged our shoulders and eased back into the car. For the next 9 days, we divided our time equally between making preparations for our move to the country. Phil purchased an imitation Swiss Army knife with a corkscrew the size of an auger. Gesh washed his underwear, and I bought 6 snakebite kits. and deliberating over how we would spend our respective shares of the profits accruing from the summer camp. Gesh was going to reserve the first 10,000 of his $166,666.66 for a blowout of the Carnival in Rio, then invest the balance in a 35-foot sloop and cruise the Caribbean with dusky-skinned women, eating lobster in Papano. Phil was going to pay off his debts and maybe open another restaurant, a New Orleans-style fish house with a tile floor, teak booths, and big lazy overheaded fans. I was worried about taxes. I figured I could buy another neglected Victorian and clandestinely pump cash into it while simultaneously writing off the cost of labor and materials. At any rate, we all agreed that we were sick to death of scrambling for a living and that here was our chance to set ourselves up for life. I'm tired of busting my ass for somebody else, Phil said, as if he'd been accused of liking it, and then being so depressive I had to spend every nickel I make on cocktails and tranquilizers. Gesh grunted his assent. My eyes burned with indignation over the wrongs and inequities Phil had suffered, not to mention the wrongs and inequities I suffered myself. I know what you mean, I said. We were sitting around the living room, idle and impatient, and we were profoundly drunk. Society was rotten to the core, I said. It was dog-eat-dog and every man for himself. I was fed up with academics, real estate agents, and carpenters alike. You gave them everything, heart and soul and sweat, and they gave you nothing in return, not even the satisfaction of a job well done. Phil said he knew exactly how I felt. Gesh was perched on the windowsill, staring into his glass. After a moment, he raised his head. Society sucks, he said with real vehemence, and then waved his hand in disgust. That happy hippie crap. I knew what he was driving at. The whole hippie ethic, beads, beards, brotherhood, the community of man, it had all been bullshit. A subterfuge to keep us from realizing that there were no jobs, the economy was in trouble, and the resources of the world going up in smoke. And we'd bought it, lived it, invented it, for all those years. His laugh was bitter. We were older now, he said, and wiser. We knew what counted. Money. Money and nothing else. It was late afternoon, the day before we were to dine at Vogelsang's, work out the last-minute details, and then head up to the summer camp. I felt good. I felt ready. As ready as I'd ever been for anything in my life. For 6 months I'd been idle, living off what I'd made from my last remodeling job. The housing market had closed up like a fist, and the pittance they gave me at the community college for teaching a summer course in freshman English, sinking lower into the pit of inactivity, self-denigration, and loneliness. Now sitting there in the glow of anticipation, the moment rich and immediate. Phil and his friend at my side like supporters at a pep rally, I felt purged of all that. Sunlight suffused the room like a dream of kings. Bruce Springsteen was singing about the promised land, and we were drinking gimlets from a pitcher. I looked out over the rooftops of the city and pictured a fleet of ships lying at anchor, massed, stepped, and washed in gold light, and I felt like Coronado, like Cortez, gazing on the vessels that would take them across the flashing seas into the vestibule of the treasury of the gods. Saltimbocca alla Romana, Vogelsang announced, backing through the door with a platter in each hand, with steamed asparagus and homemade pasta on the side. The table was littered with the remains of the first 4 courses, with beer bottles and fiascos of wine. After the antipasto, Vogelsang had served a dish of agnolotti, brodo di pesce, and caponata. About halfway through the soup course, Doust joined us, bobbing into the room in blazer and button-down shirt, apologizing for his lateness and showing us a mouthful of gleaming equine teeth. We were eating so hard we barely noticed him. When the meat had gone around, I tore a hunk of bread from the fresh-baked loaf and made a joke, in dialect with Chico Marx flourishes, about the unfortunate conflagration of our late associates at the Appalachian Lodge. Phil laughed. This is more like the Last Supper, he said. No one else cracked a smile. There was silence, broken only by the mostly rhetoric of mastication and the ring of silverware. Finally, Phil looked up and said, "Good stuff, Vogelsang. It jumps in your mouth." Vogelsang said he knew the chefs of Vanessi's and Little Joe's personally, and that he had been invited into the kitchen on several occasions. He was eating a minuscule portion himself, no more than a single bite of each dish, and supplementing it with what looked like soggy cornflakes. "You're not eating?" I said. "Oh, God," Vogelsang looked offended. "This stuff is much too rich for me." He was eating a mixture of dried fake fish and pine nuts. The saltimbocca stuck in my throat. "Listen, Herb," Gesh broke in, "why don't you fill us in on the house and all, and you know what sort of thing we can expect up there?" The silence that fell over the table was absolute. No fork clattered, no lip smacked or tooth champed. Vogelsang's Christian name was Herbert, but no one called him by his Christian name, not even his mother. He was known as Vogelsang, pure and simple. And one of his girlfriends, I can't recall her name, began calling him Vogie after the 3 of us had set through a double bill of the big sleep into have and have not. The next time I saw him, he was alone. Gesh's words sank into the silence, absorbed like the butter that oozed into the hot bread before him. Gesh knew perfectly well that our benefactor hated to be addressed as Herb, or Herbert, or any other variant of his given name. I'd specifically warned him against it, and Vogelsang knew that Gesh was trying to provoke him. But if Vogelsang was anything, he was imperturbable. I'd never seen him angry. I'd never seen him display any emotion whatever, for that matter. To be angry, frightened, happy, moved was a weakness, a loss of control. And Vogelsang never lost control. "Certainly," he said, flashing Gesh with a smile. "What do you want us to know?" Gesh was tearing at his veal with knife and fork, talking through the wedge of it stuffed inside his cheek. "Well, shit," he said. "I mean, we're going to be living out there in the asshole of nowhere for the next 9 months while you're chewing the fat down in Vanessi's. I want to know what kind of shape the place is in. Does it have running water and electricity and all that?" "Oh, yes," Vogelsang, reaching for his fish flakes. "Yes, it has all the essentials." "You've got a generator for electricity," Dow said. "Runs off an old Briggs and Stratton engine. The water comes from a big redwood holding tank just up the hill from the cabin." "The place is perfectly adequate," Vogelsang said. "With a little work, it could be really cozy." Aorta was sitting beside him. Her eyes caught mine, and she smiled. She actually smiled. Before looking down into her wine glass, I watched a piece of veal disappear between her black lips, then turned my attention back to Vogelsang. "It used to be a great hunting lodge back in the 20s, he was saying. "Great view. You've got a hilltop overgrown with fir and oak and madrone. There's even a couple of redwoods." I could see the place, or rather I could see the cabin we'd rented each summer when I was a kid. It was in Vermont, by the side of a lake. There was a smell of pine sap and wet leaves, the close, comforting feel of tree trunks grown so thick your eyes couldn't penetrate 100 feet. In the morning, loons cried like lost souls, or tanagers whistled outside the window. I remembered sitting around the stone fireplace at night, sunburned and happy, playing our hearts with my father. This is going to be all right, I thought, soothing, rustic, an adventure. When I turned back into the conversation, Dowse was talking about worm castings and the need for soil preparation. "The drainage stinks up there," he said. "Too heavy a clay content. So what you've got to do is create your own environment for each plant. A sand mulch mixture for drainage and root expression, and the worm castings for nitrogen." Later, over espresso and millefoglie, the lights turned low and Vogelsang's museum fading into the shadows, we got down to business. The cabin that supplies the equipment, the seeds, the $8 per diem. Vogelsang would front Gesh, Phil, and me each week, and beyond our share of the final profits, the disposal of the mature plants. Vogelsang had a connection who would buy all we could produce, cash up front, no questions asked. All this was easy. It was Gesh who asked for clarification of the one point that had crouched in all our minds like a stalking beast. What if we get busted? Vogelsang handled it with perfect sang-froid. "I know nothing about you. I had bought the land as an investment and was surprised to hear that anyone was on it, shocked and stunned that illicit activities were taking place there. Under the table, of course. I pay all legal fees." Dowse had come alive at the mention of the verboten word. "First offense," he said, sipping on his coffee. "No one's going to jail. A fine and a probation, that's all." I couldn't be sure, but I thought I saw his hand quaver as he set the cup down. Gesh looked angry. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then thought better of it. Aorta was expressionless. Across the table from me, Phil eased back into his chair, the effects of the scotch and wine evident in the skew of his bad eye. He was already in his new restaurant, eating oysters at a marble-topped bar. I didn't know what to think. "Don't worry," Vogelsang said. "I'll take care of you." And that's the end of Chapter 3. Thank you for joining me. I'm Ryan the Nature Gamer, and this is Budding Prospects by T.C. Boyle. We're doing one chapter at a time per video. And I shall see you next time. Peace out. Love you. Bye-bye.